Welcome to Redacted Opinions, unfiltered, raw, and authentic. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the hosts alone. And now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to Redacted Opinions, unfiltered and raw. I'm Luciano Cedroni, and with me again is Brian Kleeman. We are back on the air after a couple of years hiatus, a couple of years of peace and quiet, quite frankly, for myself, and some long-needed rest from dealing with the man on the other side of the screen. But we're excited. We're back. We've been asked by some of our hardcore followers where we went and why we weren't on the air, but we decided that we're going to give it a second chance, new and revised format, much more opinionated, much more and unfiltered as the title suggests. And I think you'll find that we'll be talking about things that your regular media just doesn't want to talk about. But before we get into that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to welcome everyone back and say hello and tell me what you've been doing for those couple of years.
It's great to be back. I don't think it was a couple of years, but I do think we did a couple of things right. We paid the fines to the CRTC, so they've allowed us back on the air. But seriously speaking, it's exciting to be back. It's a new format that we're trying, redacted opinions, unfiltered and raw. Our intention is not to be controversial for the sake of being controversial. But I think Luke and I, as we've consumed our news over the last year or two, and the world's getting more challenging, volatile, and interesting, we're both just tired of the spin you hear in the media, on podcasts, the political correctness. So I think what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and cover the same stories, especially those that have a nexus to security and risk management. But we're going to be honest about it. We're going to call a spade, and some people may agree. Some people may disagree, and that's the wonderful thing. We really encourage dialogue, and maybe as we go forward and we get a better grasp of technology, we might be able to have some live interactions with people listening on line and sending us their comments. But at the very least, we do have a LinkedIn page, and we'll provide details to that afterwards. And we would encourage people, if they have comments, good, bad, or indifferent, just to send us a message via our LinkedIn page.
Yeah, so my first comment is keep it short and to the point, which is what we always come back to. But I think the key thing there is authenticity. That's what we are. We're not going to be going off on tangents that are trending in the social media sphere. I think the one thing that we bring to the table is honest, direct, and practical insights to what's going on and how you can apply it back to your business, which is ultimately what we're looking to do here, is to give back to the community and make you guys be able to protect your businesses and your assets and your people more effectively as we move into this space.
If I can, I think maybe because we're going to have, I think, 100 or 200,000 new listeners in the next week or two once the word gets out that we're back on the air. So maybe take a second or two just to talk about who we are, because people may not know who we are. I'm Brian Kleeman. I'm a security practitioner. I've been in the security industry running large national programs for corporations. Started off a brief period of time in the public safety world, but I've got 30 plus years of experience, last 20 years or so in the commercial real estate sphere, protecting some of Canada's most iconic buildings. Not sure.
No, I come from a policing and security background as well. I spent 2 years up in New York region dealing with a bunch of organized criminals, and then got into the private sector where I've been ever since. I too have worked for some major players in the commercial real estate space and led those programs, developed those programs, really focused on risk mitigation, threat risk management, intelligence, that kind of stuff, as opposed to frontline operations. I wouldn't call myself a tactical practitioner, but I do like the strategy and I do like the geopolitics, and I think that's what we're really aiming for in this new series of ours. We did have an old series, for those who weren't aware, in the news that is still floating around out there, which was really focused more on the security aspect specifically. But this one, I think we're going to broaden that scope a little and always bring it back to what we can suggest to our audience to protect themselves better and just to be aware of what's going on around you and understand that what's halfway around the world today is at your doorstep tomorrow. And you can't be naive enough to think that's not true anymore. The world is a very small place. So unless you got anything else to add, Mr. Kleeman, I'm ready to go into our first topic.
In the spirit of keeping it short to the point, I have one more thing to add. It is our intention on occasion to bring in guests into the dialogue, and we're talking about people that are probably in the public sphere, people that are experts in the areas that we're going to bring them in. So We're trying to line some people up. It's not going to be guests every week, but we'll try once a month or so to get some interesting people in to join us. Okay,
Yeah.
I've said my piece. I'm content. So we'll see you next week.
Yes.
Okay.
So today's topic, folks, is on major events coming to town. And given the fact that we've got FIFA coming to North America in less than a couple weeks, and it's going to be the biggest sporting event in history, but it's also going to be the biggest security event in history as well. It's going to be played across three countries: Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. 106 or some odd games, which is almost double, more than double what it used to be. So there's going to be a lot of teams, and what that means, a lot of security issues, a lot of concerns, a lot of risks that are going to impact the business owner. And all too often, our media gets rightfully focused on the good things about these major events, but there's a lot of things that they tend to overlook, or they don't want to talk about. And that's what we're going to talk about today, those risks that are often overlooked and how they can come back and bite you in the butt if you're not careful. I'm going to tell you this. Look, if you talk to the average person out there right now, they're walking through downtown Toronto, they're seeing all the banners, they're seeing all the hype and the hoopla around the World Cup. So most of those people, I would tell you, are amped up, they're excited, rightfully right? Like I said, they're here for a good time. But they're not really thinking about some of the concerns they should be thinking about heading into that tournament. How's it going to impact that city? How's it going to impact their life, their ability to go to work over that time span? So why don't we start there? What would you say to a person who just looks at all the good things, right? All the window dressing, as opposed
Well,
to...
I think they're right. I think there are a lot of good things. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really important to realize that the World Cup, the soccer games, is not just a stadium event.
Yes.
It's not just something that's going to happen at the stadium. It's not just something that's going to happen in the local bars and restaurants. It's a citywide event, and it's going to have all sorts of far-reaching implications. Everything from the most obvious things that we could think of to things like the person that lives up in Richmond Hill with his daily ride downtown to Toronto on the Don Valley Parkway. Traffic is going to be mayhem. A lot of people I talk to are planning to work remotely for the period of FIFA because it's going to be the city is going to be exciting, and it's also going to be very challenging. One of the things I tell clients and I tell people is there's a whole bunch of things other than the stadium we got to think about. And one of them is crowd density and crowd management. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of people in the downtown core coming either directly for FIFA or just because Toronto's an exciting place this summer. And that's going to put all sorts of pressures on infrastructure in downtown core. I was interviewed a few weeks ago by CBC, and they asked me what I thought about the city's traffic plan. And I basically said, I'm not a traffic expert, but I would suggest that at the best of times, Toronto is a difficult city. Downtown Toronto is a difficult city, or the whole city is difficult to get around. You put 200,000 new people into the mix, it's going to be just mayhem. So crowd management's an issue. Transportation disruption, and again, not just going to the games, but everywhere. I'd say even around the greater Toronto area is going to be significantly impacted. And you got to think about that. Okay, public order and protest activity. This is one of the largest spectacles that's occurring in the world. And there's going to be no bigger audience looking at the city of Toronto and the FIFA cities during the FIFA World Cup events, games going on. So public order issues. I know a lot of properties that I deal with. I'm still a consultant. They really haven't thought about that. They still have their head in the fact that it's a stadium event.
Yeah.
We're in Yorkville. We're in some other location just west or east of the venue or north of the venue. Not too concerned. I think it's a little bit too late right now to really get into detailed plans, but I would just say that everyone is going to be impacted one way or the other. Certainly, we're going to have a lot of fun, but there are going to be a lot of things that are outside the norm that if you're not planned for, buckle up and be prepared to respond to.
Yeah, and historically, even if you're familiar with World Cup history, which I know you're not a big fan as far as I can recall, but
World Cup, that's baseball, right?
Yeah, no, it's football, like real football, because you kick it with your feet, unlike
gotcha.
American football where you pick it up and run with it. But there is a long history, and again, we're focusing on the World Cup, but you can actually apply this to many global events that come to cities, whether you're talking about the G7, the G20, the Americas in Montreal, that went south pretty quickly. But anytime you get a large contingent of people in a condensed space, there's increased risk of something going wrong. And then add alcohol to that mix, which is a big part of these celebrations with these groups. And then all of a sudden, even though their intent may not be malicious, it could still cause you a problem as a business owner if they can't stand on their own 2 feet. That's a problem for you. You need to deal with that. If they fall unconscious, like, it becomes your problem. So it's not just about malicious intent or the potential for these crowds to go haywire or sideways. It's just sometimes they're just having a good time, and even that could become a problem if you're not careful.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the list that I gave earlier. There's several other things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. There's cyber threats.
Yep.
Okay. And we're starting to see that. There's going to be, as I said, the eyes of the world are going to be on Toronto and Canada, and there's all sorts of cyber activity, nefarious cyber activity that's occurring. We're looking at things like fraud scams and financial crime. We're already seeing and getting reports of tickets being sold at crazy dollar amounts, and that's nothing new. But people spending the money only to find out that they've been defrauded, that there are no tickets that are coming at the end of the day. We're also looking at things like terrorism. The likelihood of terrorism, I talk about protest activity, but a lone actor, someone wanting to make a point on the world stage. So there's all these types of things and activities, some that we can prepare for, others we can't be prepared for, but all of them that we've got to be aware of. One last thing I'll just say, day-to-day living in Toronto, there's going to be amplified crime just by nature of the volume of people.
Yeah.
If there's a ratio of one criminal incident for every 10,000 people, you add that by a multiple of 100, then you see the incident of crime, from pickpocketing to crimes against persons. Just make sure you keep your cell phone locked in your front pocket.
Yeah, because that's been the historical norm for most of these events. Like I say, organized criminal groups know that these types of events are windfalls for them. So you will see pickpocket rings, minor theft, petty theft. One of the things that I don't think is being talked about enough, it has made some news, but the one that really bugs me is the human trafficking angle. Historically, these tournaments attract tons of prostitution, but prostitution is one thing if it's a woman who's willingly engaging in that business line, but human trafficking is a completely different animal when these people are basically being groomed and mistreated and basically treated as slaves, for lack of a better word, to get out there and so that their masters can get paid for sexual activity with people who are going to these games. So it's not something that the media wants to talk about because it's really ugly, but it is a real reality for the people on the ground that are victimized by this.
I agree. And I think, quite honestly, no matter what the degree of illegal sexual activity, prostitution, it is a direct nexus to human trafficking, because unless you're looking at countries in the world where the women are completely independent, it's their free will, or maybe like in Las Vegas, some of the brothels, there's no woman that wants to work for some pimp that's doing it necessarily voluntarily or willingly. There's some degree of coercion, and you're right. You just multiply the amount of activity that's happening. You bring in alcohol, you bring in money, and there's all sorts of things that are going to happen. And again, I think we, as facility operators, building operators, we have to be aware. We have to have our eyes open. I know, Luke, we've talked about this before, but on the human trafficking piece of it, okay, there's things that shopping center operators, that commercial property operators should be looking out for. And I tell you, I believe that most of these folks are asleep at the switch. They have no idea of the role they play at trying to put a curb to this horrible activity that's occurring.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon in Canada. That's the other thing. If you talk to your point, most Canadians probably think, well, how big can it be in Canada? It's a massive problem in Toronto, in Canada, across Canada. Just like drugs have become a massive problem for Canada, that naivety that it's a good place and we're all nice people. That's exactly why we're in the state we're in, because we're so naive that these criminal organizations are taking advantage of it. They use our soft on crime approach to their own advantage. And ultimately, the people on the ground are the ones paying. To your point, all these hotels that are taking these people in, they have a key role to play in identifying potential human trafficking victims. But whether or not they understand how to do that, if they've been trained, if they even thought about bringing in the training, I would probably bet on the side that says no.
They say it's a world-class city, and I agree in many respects it is. But the degree of naiveness on the part of Canadians and a part of operators in Toronto, and I will tell you this, and maybe my commercial real estate clients and friends won't want to hear, but we're asleep at the switch. We really don't understand the threats that we face, the reality. Forget about FIFA just day to day. The level of preparedness, often you'll find that the programs, the risk management programs, are not because they've done anything proactively. It's because they hope nothing will happen. And most of the time, nothing does happen, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you're protected. And I, for one, would not want, my children are a little bit older now, but I wouldn't want my teenage children, if I had teenage children, going on a bus to downtown Toronto without adult supervision. There's a lot of things out there. And the threats I would break down into two categories. There's those that are the most likely to occur, and they're going to be annoying. They might be a little bit impactful, but they're not necessarily consequential. But then there's another category, which I call high consequential threats, that if they do materialize, and God willing they don't, can have some real adverse negative impact. And in that, and I don't want to be a Pollyanna. We're talking about lone actor violence, vehicle attacks, drone incidents, major crowd crush, serious public disorder, cyber disruption affecting event operations, attack or threats against teams, officials, or public gatherings, targeted hate motivated incidents. So basically, this stuff is happening now. It's
Yeah.
just going to be amplified in a few weeks throughout
Yeah.
the summer.
You've got a global audience of 5 billion people. It's the biggest global audience in history. 6 or 7 people were stabbed there. Clearly, there were conduits there to extremist terrorism, slant to the person, radicalization. That's the word I was looking for. And yet here, you see in the paper, you can't say that. You need to start recognizing what the risks are and calling them what they are to be able to deal with them. If you pretend that it's not what it actually is, then people will, you know what I'm saying? They won't treat it with the sincere and genuine assessment of that risk that it deserves. If you keep telling me that that thing in front of me is a white pony and I think it's a white pony when in actual fact it's a bull, then I'm going to approach it like it's a pony. When I get stabbed, I'm going to say, well, how? I didn't know it was. We're not serving a security purpose by talking like that or labeling events, leading the public discussion towards political correctness versus political reality.
But one of the things that I would say is if you just look at what's happening in this city, in this country, but in this city, okay, because we're here in Toronto right now, and you just look at some of the public order event and the anti-Semitism and the hate that's going on in the city, and you look at the organization behind a lot of this activity. I'm not saying this is a powder keg, but I don't know that we've got a handle on it. I think we're conflicted. There seems to be a problem of keeping the peace versus enforcing the law. And I acknowledge that's a fine line. But what happens is the people that want to break the peace and want to cause mayhem, they are using our freedoms and our values against us. And I think we have to wake up to that reality. And the roller coaster is leaving the station. FIFA, the World Cup, is going to create that platform that any whack job with a cause is going to be on steroids, just going crazy and causing disruption.
And on disruption, that's a good segue to another point because I want to be conscious of our time. I think disruption is going to be a key problem for most business owners in that downtown corridor because they've got a security zone. It's going to be locked down, certainly on game days. And what is that going to do to the rest of the business area as well? If you're in the zone, you're not necessarily lucky, like people will assume, right? The police are going to be focused there, resources are going to be focused there. What do you got to worry about? That's not true. You're in the focused area, you're inside that zone, and if things start to happen, you've got to increase your, if you own a restaurant, you might benefit from increased crowds, but you've also got increased use of your services. You've got increased issues around the hygiene of your restaurant. How are your deliveries going to get into and out of that zone? You remember you and I both lived through G20. We had all these great plans about pass cards for people who had to be in the zone, and deliveries had a separate schedule and all that kind of, and it all fell apart pretty damn quick once game day came. So businesses are going to suffer on the inside, and if you're on the outside, you've got overflow, you've got crowd density with uncontrolled, not necessarily uncontrolled like the police are just going to let it go, but the resources are going to be focused on the game zone and the fan zone. The rest of the city needs to operate normally, but it's not going to be normal. It's going to have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fans walking through those streets. I don't know if you're familiar with takeovers, but part of that World Cup culture is that fans will come from whatever country is here in the thousands, not to be part of the game because they know they're not going to get tickets, but they want to be in the city to experience that game On the outside, they'll take over Sankofa Square, right? You'll get 10,000 Panamanians there and they'll take over that square. What do? Are you prepared for that? Have you thought about that as a business? How's that going to impact you? It's not just about making the money. There's also a risk to making that money because now you've got increased traffic. That means increased risk, increased drinking, increased potential for assaults and petty crime, and all that stuff starts to go up.
Yeah, and you talked about like in the zone, we're going to have heavy police presence, but Toronto, at the best of times, we have 20-minute response times for priority one calls, or at least it's getting a little bit better now, but it's not at the 3 or 4 or 5 minutes that it should be. So if you're pulling cops from throughout the city and throughout the region for that matter, and putting them down into the around the stadium area, what does that do for the rest of the city? So we've got to be aware of that. And I really think there's some, it's never too late. But some recommendations I think people have to consider is, I think if you haven't done it and you're operating some sort of a venue, okay, a facility, a shopping mall, whatever, you should review your access control protocols. You got to look at how do people get in and get out? How do you lock your doors? When do you decide to lock the doors? You got to confirm your emergency response procedures. Most people don't have them, and of those that do have them, many of them have never looked at them since they were put into place years ago, and in most cases, they're outdated. Protect emergency routes, your fire exits, your exits into the alleyways. Make sure they're not blocked by delivery vehicles or things of that nature. Increase your CCTV monitoring. Plan for protest activity. And again, I talk to so many operators that say, well, if there's a protest, the police will be there. Well, the police will be there. The police will be there to do what the police do. And some people aren't really happy with what the police are doing right now. But they're not going to be there to take care of the impacts that are occurring in your building. Review hostile vehicle exposure. Look at your parking garages, your loading docks. Look at how bad people can get in to your building. Review your cybersecurity situation. A lot of operators tell me, building operators, cybersecurity, we're not a bank, we're not American Express. I'll tell you, I've lived through experiences where hackers have got into a building cyber systems, taken over their pass cards, and locked 3,000 people out of a building. So there's a lot of things that you could do that if you haven't done, you should be thinking about. And I think the biggest thing is you should say, what will we do if? Okay, and maybe that's the starting point. If this, what is the plan? And if you figure out you don't have a solution or response, you better get one quickly. Or if you survive the summer, make sure as soon as you can that you put such a plan in place.
Yeah, that was some good points. But the persistent feeling from people that this is a police problem is just, I'm dumbfounded by that. The naivety, the ignorance of what's actually going on in the world today, to sit there and still think that a phone call to 911 and police are going to be coming to you like the cavalry is just, it's not going to happen. So you need to take control of your own security situation. And to your point, all those things make sense. I would only add a couple of other things to what you've said. First of all, everything starts with an assessment. You need to get together with your operators, your security team, your management team. They need to be on the same page, not presuming that security is going to take care of it or that ops will take care of it. You have to get together as a team and talk about, where is our building situated? What are the risks around us? Are we next to a fan zone? Are we in a fan zone? Or are we a couple miles away? All that will dictate the type of security preparation you should be thinking about for major events, not just FIFA, but anything that comes to town that could give you that same type of issue. And then the other piece that I would add to that is, you got to move away from deploying security just because it looks good. And we talk about security theater. There's a difference between putting a guy in a uniform at a doorway and calling that security. You've met the security requirement. Let's put it that way. But you're not doing security. If that guard now is trained in behavior recognition, is doing some patrols, understands that today's not just any day, but there's a game going on just down the street, and that there's a protest coming potentially up this street, and there's a party going on in one of our tenant spaces. Now that guard is starting to think about security. He's not just meeting the standard of saying we have a guard, right? That is what we call intelligence-led policing or security. You make your decisions based on information you have, and that's how you build your programs. Give that guard the tools they need. None of those guards, very few of them will be told, this is what we expect from you. This is the anticipated risks. This is what you need to look for. This is who you call if you see something like that. They're just going to be left out there to fend for themselves. And that's the problem with security. especially during a major event. Because you got so many people who are coming to do security in the name of security, but not really trained in it, you're going to get that perception is that, oh my God, there's a lot of security around. But there's a difference between security theater and actual security. And I would say that most of the times we're looking at security theater, not the actual protective effectiveness of real security.
Yeah, it's really just an illusion of security. It's another set of eyes and ears, and that's not a bad thing. But again, it creates an illusion which is not warranted. I think people have to be realistic. I think people got to have fun, okay? But they got to have their eyes open. They got to realize it won't be business as usual. And that's not a bad thing. Toronto's a big city, and it's important to have these type of events and these big concerts coming to town and everything like that. But we got to think about what can go wrong, and we got to do all we can to minimize that likelihood. And equally important that if something does go wrong, no matter how good you think the plan is, that when it goes wrong, that we have a response. We thought about how we're going to respond to get things back to normal. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, that plan the best you can, but make sure that whatever happens, whatever that might be, you've got some sort of way to respond in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was Eisenhower or Schwarzkopf that said every good plan fails at the point of contact.
I think it was not MacArthur. Patton, wasn't it Patton?
Was it Patton? I can't remember who it was, but it was that every good plan falls apart at the first.
So what day are we releasing this podcast?
So yeah, we're aiming for Thursday releases for these podcasts going forward. We record on the weekends so that we both got the time to do it. We aim for a weekly Thursday release of a podcast for our listeners' enjoyment. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. And if we said a few things that maybe made you uncomfortable, or you think, oh, no one's actually told me about that, then that's what we're looking for. And if that's what we were able to deliver to you, then please share what you're hearing and let people know that we're back, and follow us online, because it helps us figure out what we need to do to make it bigger and better.
I agree. It was a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a great run. We're planning to not take a summer hiatus because we just launched right now. And our goal is a weekly podcast. So we hope you tune in, whether you watch the video or you listen to it audio on where are we going to be hosting it?
It's going to be hosted on Spotify, but you'll be able to hear it on any major platform that podcasts play.
And also we've got a YouTube page set up, I think, right? We're going to get that information out. If you follow either Luke on LinkedIn or myself on LinkedIn, or if you look up Redacted Opinions on LinkedIn, we will be posting all sorts of information and websites and articles you'll be able to find there. So we hope you like it. And if you don't, we don't mean to offend, but we do want to hear from you.
I thought you were going to say we don't care.
No, we do care.
All right. That wraps it up for the first one. I'm a little, what's the word for it? Oh my God, rusty. But I'm excited. I'm glad to be back
Rusty,
on the air.
you were pretty pathetic. I'm glad I was able to hold it together for us.
God damn.
This
Okay.
should be fun. Looking forward to these and work with you again.
Yeah, we'll talk to you guys in a week.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Redacted Opinions. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed our podcast to help build our audience. Tune in next week for another episode of Redacted Opinions.